This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everybody, and welcome back to Ben Talks Talent Conversations. I'm here with Frank Judd Justiniano. He is a director of TA for his organization. And today, we're going to talk about recruiting. We're going to talk about talent. We're going to talk about a few other things. Frank, thank you so much for being on the pod.
Pleasure, Ben.
Right, awesome. So I'm going to jump right in. We've got a handful of questions. But the first thing I want to talk about is when you and I met first. You talked a little bit about yourself in your view to recruitment as you're someone who is very much so candidate-centric.
Yep.
For those candidates out there who have experienced a recruiting process, maybe they loved it, maybe they didn't love it. I would love for you to define that and just like share what that means to you and the way you operate.
Sure. I feel, one of the things that is a real talent for recruiters is having to instill trust and instill it very quickly. So for me, in my journey in recruiting, I didn't take that very lightly, right? I take that pretty critically to my approach to building a relationship with my candidates, building a relationship across the board, whether the opportunities that I'm working on are right for them or not. These are business networking opportunities, right? And so for me, it's really understanding your organization, understanding what it can provide, the steps of progression, all of those pieces. And as you're talking to talent out in the marketplace, plugging those pieces, like, is this person right for your organization, given their obviously their qualities and what they're able to do professionally, but B, culturally, right? And never feeling like I have to put them in process just to hit a number of, in the recruiting world, sometimes it's SO1, so first round interviews, things like that, but more so like providing that curated experience for them to feel like if I'm coming to you with an opportunity and we're talking through it, and after I've gotten to know you, this is why I'm presenting it, right? Because you've given me all of these examples as to what it is you're looking for, and this is why this role makes sense. So I do like to approach it from the candidate's perspective. We're also in a very much candidate-driven market today as well, where the talent out there by far, surpasses, I think where we've seen ourselves in a lot. When I started recruiting, I wouldn't say that was the case. Back in 2015, I think companies still very much had a little bit more control, if you want to call it that. And I think COVID exacerbated the fact that we now realize there are less people qualified to do the amount of job openings that there are. So because of that, I think candidates know their worth now, right? And so my approach is to just make sure that, I am providing them with a great experience, but also making sure that they feel like I'm not just like forcing them into an opportunity, right? I'm giving them all the reasons why they've given me as to why they're a right fit for whatever it is that we're working on.
Yeah, that's great, because what good does that do anyone to be forced into an opportunity or to do an interview? Like, nobody wins there. So yeah, I like that, because you're right. In many roles in recruitment, there is pressure to hit metrics. And it's like, at what cost? Like, who benefits from there? And the reality is no one does. So I appreciate that. I think that's really important to having a great candidate experience, which I think is more important than ever when you're hiring.
Absolutely. Well, and as a recruiter too, sometimes I think it's easy to get lost in the work and say, I have to validate, the effort I'm putting in, and therefore I'm, just shoving applications or shoving people through a process. A lot of times too, I think it's also the easy kind of way into everything, but I look at it as, we're here to build relationships, right? So even if I spoke to you and I loved your background and I thought, you would be perfect, but in conversation, it turns out, this is not the right opportunity. In building that relationship, this is where you could be someone I can present somewhere else at a different time when it would be right. And I think that when I have done that in the past, that's only brought my relationship with that individual much stronger, and actually with the client too, because I'm providing you with people that are hits on all aspects, right?
Yeah.
And I think it shows that partnership on both ends as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, I couldn't agree with that more. Something that's interesting. So you told me, a little bit about what your organization does, and you provide outsourced customer service solutions.
Yep.
Which is so interesting. I just think it's a very interesting business model. Could you tell me, like, the differences between that and what you've done previously, and maybe talk about some of the challenges it presents, and maybe some of why it's exciting and what the upside is. I think it's just a really interesting field.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I started my career at a small boutique, I would say retained search firm. And I used the word retain very intentionally because we really did no work, no business that was contingent and didn't have some type of commitment from the client financially to get it moving. And that has its pros and its cons, like everything else. But in starting that, being that we were a boutique firm, we were very intentional about the roles that we took on. It was very food beverage focused. So those were kind of the industries we served, but we were, um, very deliberate about the types of functions, right? So it was very diverse in the sense that yes, we didn't maybe do things that were outside of food and beverage from a CPG standpoint, but within the CPG world, we were doing anything, everything, right? So that was marketing, it was finance, it was operations, supply chain, you name it. And so because of that exposure to all aspects of what makes a CPG business run is an experience I was afforded. So from going to that to a staffing firm that was very much more volume based, temporary labor, sometimes temp to hire, but mostly meant to be temporary, was a drastic change. And so the second organization I was a part of was more, like I said, volume, volume, volume. And where I'm at today is a little bit of both, right? And it's very different, I think, the approach of a volume-based temporary position as opposed to a permanent-based, professional type of opportunity that's more long-term FTE. So I don't think, the approach in terms of finding people changes. Processes are still processes, but the type of talent, the type of conversations you're going to have, and even just the rate in which an opportunity from start to end closes is very
Right.
different.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very true. And you and I talked about like the benefits of having, having that background in being in a retained firm, being, having that external versus internal. Um, and I think it's incredibly helpful. And I think, you talking about like the differences and understanding the differences, and you have that because you've been in multiple different areas. For those who maybe don't have the awareness and
Sure.
don't have the understanding,
Mhm.
could you talk a little bit about the differences between being an external recruiter, being an internal recruiter, how they're different, and then I would love for you to touch on like why you think it might be a benefit for a recruiter to have experience.
Sure. I think major differences are um, the types of conversations you're having, right? At the end of the day, I mean, yes, you're out in the market, you're still building relationships, you're still getting to know people, and you're still facilitating those conversations. But the conversations are a little different. So when you're external, you have multiple clients, right? Most of the time, I was working anywhere between 8 to 10 different roles, maybe between 4 to 5 different clients, right? So how you plan your day, the types of conversations you're having, how you want to have them, and how you curate some of that are going to be a little different, right? So for me, and this is what worked for me, was, I made sure that my days were spent in blocks so that my conversations were consistent about one thing so that then I can turn to the other. So I didn't have to worry about, okay, this conversation at 9 o'clock is for a director of operations for, let's say, Pepsi. But my, 10:30 is a senior manager or senior brand manager with like Pabst, for example. I didn't want to have to like juggle that. So it was like, all right, today, here are the two things I'm working on, and then, so on and so forth. And the other, drastic major difference is, as much as I loved managing multiple clients and multiple different roles at different times, because again, the exposure to understanding a full cycle business, I think is invaluable. But you never really get to see the fruit of your work. And what I mean by that is, you hire these people for these organizations, and sure, you hear, a few months later, like, oh, this was a great hire, the person's doing well, and kudos here, kudos there, appreciate that. But you don't physically get to see that person really in the role doing the impact that you knew they would have made because you're the one assessing that on the front end. And internally, that is absolutely one of the things that I think is, a highlight, right? You're directly responsible for the hiring of people within your own organization, and then you get to watch those people be subject matter experts, move the organization hopefully in a positive direction, and knowing you kind of made a little bit of an impact there in not just identifying that person, but you've already then built a relationship with this person, and now you get to actually work alongside them. So
Yeah.
it's different in that respect for sure.
Yeah. It's funny. I think people who are outside of the industry, like so many people have no idea that like as an agency recruiter, as a contingent recruiter, retained recruiter, you place like tons of people. And then it's like sometimes you just never even meet these people. And it's like you have this major impact. They've switched careers. Like, it's I've moved people from Washington to Maryland and then
Oh yeah.
never met them. And as a corporate recruiter, it's kind of cool. You can like bump into someone you got a job for, like in the lunchroom. You're like, all right,
Yep.
how's the job going? Great, amazing.
Yeah. Well, and then
So
the
it
other
is different.
component to it too is, you get to, it's almost like, was I right? You get
Yeah.
you get to kind of see yourself, all right, as I self-analyze this person as a candidate, here's what they told me they did, here's how they told me they did it, and here's where some of the successes came. And then you either see them being able to replicate that, or maybe not in some cases, right? And so
Yeah.
to me, it's also, I don't want to say validation of your work, because yes, it is. And a lot of the time it's like, yeah, I knew that person was going to do well in this role, and like, look at them go and look at them lead these meetings and I now get to be a part of. And it's like, all right, so I do know what I'm doing
Yeah.
directly,
Yeah.
and I think, you asked in terms of like the benefits of both. To me, it's important to just know what you don't know, and be in an opportunity where, again, you're expanding your subject matter expertise, right? So it's still recruiting, but it's recruiting in a different space, or it's recruiting in a different environment. And it only makes you a better recruiter when you have been able to kind of see any and every type of function and every single type of role. And I think it also allows you, as you continue this as a career, to even quickly identify these types of folks the more and more you get to work with them. And you build like a bench, right? And you build a
Yeah.
Rolodex of candidates to who to go to, and it only makes you better, for sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate having that like diversity, like in my experience, and I wouldn't trade either of them for anything.
Yep.
I loved my time as a corporate recruiter, loved my time as an agency recruiter. So I'm a big fan of both. Um, I want
Same.
to I want to talk to the candidates a bit.
Mhm.
So whenever I'm talking to someone who's a leader in recruitment, I like to get their advice for candidates. So let's just say you have a candidate who's listening to this and they've got an upcoming interview and it's like a dream company, dream opportunity. They're really excited for it. Um, what advice would you give to that person to go in there and like just nail their interview? Like from your perspective, you've sat on many sides of the table, you're now in leadership, you've trained people, you have a team, like you've experienced the industry from a lot of vantage points. What would you say to them?
The first thing I like to tell candidates is, it's important to do your research, right? If you've identified an organization or even a function specifically, and hopefully you're doing that function at an organization that you feel some type of affinity to, but if you've identified this opportunity that you're interviewing for as one that is, quote unquote dream job, I think the first thing you have to do is you research. And when I say research, I'm talking about you research the organization and what you can know about them up front, that is much in line with what you've done, right? So you can speak to those correlation points of where you've done some of that elsewhere. You do your research on the people that are interviewing you. You want to make sure, a simple LinkedIn search is to kind of their progression, their career, some of the functions they've had even within the organization. Because those are things that I think, people want to know that you're invested, right? Especially, again, if we're talking about a dream role, right? I want to see you're invested in the process, right? And how you're identifying that this is the right move for you. And I always tell candidates, it's okay to, I implore them to ask questions. And the questions shouldn't just be asking for the sake of asking, right? This goes back to the research. As you think of your career, you think of what you've done, what you're learning every step of the way throughout the interviewing process, you're only going to know based on the questions you're asking. So when I talk to candidates, right, as a director of talent acquisition, I like to carry my conversations a little looser than I think maybe some other people in my role would. And what I mean by that is, I know I'm not the CEO, I'm not the CMO, I'm not the lead person that is the hiring authority for this. So you can feel a little bit more confident and more comfortable asking me some direct questions about, what am I potentially getting myself into? What
Yeah,
is the
yeah,
current state of this department or this function? What are the challenges? You want to get this person's raw understanding of it, so that you could do a little homework and then correlate those points with what you've done in your career, so that as you speak to people in that specific department, running those specific teams, you can speak to your solutions that you're going to provide to the problems that they're having within their business. And I think that that's one of the way that you kind of showcase that you mean business, right? And
yeah.
and you're intentional about this. This is not just something you're doing, for the sake of spending some time getting to know somebody else.
Yeah, that is interviewing 202 advice, like buried in there, that I hope people caught. In early rounds of the interview process, ask
Yeah,
what are the challenges for this role?
yeah,
What are the difficult aspects of this role? And then when you move into later rounds, you can orient your answers around your ability to solve those type of
exactly.
problems. That is an
Mhm.
advanced interview technique, but it's super powerful. So I agree with everything you said. But I wanted to reiterate that just because I didn't want it to get lost in like, a video that's going to be 20 minutes long. Like that's great interview advice for people.
Yeah.
Um, Last question.
Yep.
What are you passionate about outside of work? So outside of TA, outside of recruitment, here's your chance to talk about something that you just find interesting.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
Sure. Well, I'm a father to two going to be now 10-month-old twin girls. So obviously very, very passionate about the new role that I have and, my husband and our family in general. And I love my family, but tangibly, I'm a collector of fragrances. I'm very
Okay.
passionate about fragrances. My collection now is close to about 410. So it's ridiculous. It's obnoxious. But yeah, it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. It's something that I think as a child, my grandparents had to come here from Cuba, and left everything, right? So when my grandmother came, one of the things she taught us was luxury isn't necessarily always tied to like material things, and you don't have to spend like $1,000 on a bag or whatever. You can look apart, but like, if you want a little piece of luxury, get the fragrance of that
Yeah.
brand. And she was big
Okay.
on Chanel number 5. And so at the time that was what, like maybe $85. So you could have a piece of Chanel for $85. You don't have to spend
Yeah.
$5,000 on a bag. And it
Yeah.
just
Well,
kind of
I mean,
became
it brings me to the question, like, do you have a favorite then? You've got over 400. If you like, let's just say there, like you could only grab one, like building was collapsing, you had to grab one,
Mhm.
although you could probably hold more than one, but let's just say you
Yeah,
could only grab one. Do you have like the one?
that's hard. You're asking me to pick between my babies. You know, I don't have one, and I'm not just trying to say
Okay.
that like I don't have just one. I can tell you fragrances with iris in it tend to be where I lean most towards, iris and
Okay.
ambers. Um, but I pride myself on never wearing just one, so I layer a lot, right?
Okay.
Part of what I love about fragrances is kind of like, how can I curate this to feel like, my scent today is going to be different from anything anyone else is going to smell, because you'd have to have both of these or sometimes three in order to make this
Yeah.
scent profile. But I mean, if I had to choose one,
Yeah.
I'd probably choose, it's called Peacock Throne by a brand called Thameen London. Only
Okay.
because yeah, I wore it on my first date with my husband. He kind of forced me to wear it on my wedding. And whenever we do like date night or something like that, I'll wear it just because I know that. And he doesn't let me layer it when I wear it for those
Just
types of
wants
occasions.
pure straight up. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess I'll go with that one. But I promise you, if my house is burning down, I'm grabbing more than one.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, we'll tell you what, Frank, I appreciate your time and appreciate you sharing your wisdom. And thank you for joining the pod and probably for the foreseeable future holding the title as the best smelling guest on the pod. So thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you, Ben.